Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Apologies for the delay getting this one out. I know the Yang Daily has been very much not daily lately. I think I'm going to try to get back to daily episodes, even if they're very short, like just 2 or 3 big items. I want to stay as true to the podcast's purpose as we can, even though my time is constrained now. Anyway, we've got a lot of big UBI news and some important democracy evidence to discuss today. Let's get to it. Quick shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park, Shay Meehan, and Nathan Stankowski, as well as all our other patrons. You keep us all informed and engaged. If any of you out there want to join these advocates of humanity first and independent journalism, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. It would only take a couple of bucks a month from each listener to keep this podcast and community going and growing into the future. Now on to the news. Texas Attorney General Office spent twice as many hours investigating voter fraud in 2020 as it did in 2018. Over 22,000 hours, which would be more than 11 years of full-time employment for a single person. Attorney General Paxton has made the hunt for voter fraud a top priority of his office and gave the Election Integrity Unit access to 8 additional law enforcement sergeants on top of the 9 already assigned, and doubled the number of prosecutors to 4. So, what did they get for all that time and taxpayer money? 16 prosecutions, half as many as in 2018. About 1 per 500,000 voters. All were false addresses, none were sentenced to jail time. So that's twice as much investigation to find half as much fraud. If anything, what the Attorney General's office showed is that voter fraud was not significant in 2018 and is 1/4 as significant now. Basically, they showed that the election was secure, as other authorities were stating, and that their own claims of widespread voter fraud are a load of hooey. In its 15 years of existence, the unit has prosecuted a few dozen cases in which offenders received jail time, none of them involving widespread fraud. This is only the latest of many such demonstrations. No investigation by Republicans or otherwise has ever found significant fraud in U.S. federal elections. The GOP have launched over 250 voter suppression bills to reduce voting among demographics that predominantly vote against them, and they are using voter fraud as the excuse. It is a lie. Our elections are secure according to every investigation ever conducted. The threat to democracy comes not from voters, but the GOP. If you are not willing to accept defeat in an election, you are hostile to the very concept of democracy. If you seek to let politicians choose their voters rather than the other way around, you are hostile to democracy. If you seek to cripple the functioning of democratic government, you are hostile to democracy. Democracy is the founding principle of America. Attacks upon it are not acceptable. That is as anti-American as it gets. Do not buy these baloney justifications that attempt to drag you into it. Jack Dorsey recently donated another $3 million to Give Directly for unconditional cash grants in Africa. He got that money from selling a tweet, specifically his first tweet, as an NFT. We should probably cover this new phenomenon because it could become a big deal in the future. NFTs are non-fungible tokens, basically a unique digital certificate of authenticity for some asset. The blockchain's decentralized ledger makes it possible to trade certifications to digital assets like music, videos, tweets, whatever. As an example, think of collector's items, owning the original of a painting. Copies can be made of the painting, but some people value the original far, far more. It's pretty difficult to prove that you have an original painting, but until recently, it was impossible to prove that you have an original digital asset. NFTs make it possible to prove that you own the original of a digital painting or the like. Easy duplication has been both a blessing and curse of digital assets. Whereas it's hard to duplicate a painting, you can copy and paste a picture. For the most part, that's great, but it's a problem for artists and others who depend on selling their work. Hence the piracy scandals with music and video games, for example. NFTs are a way to make a version of a digital asset scarce and authenticate it. Then you can trade that marked asset. That's what Jack did with his tweet. Elon Musk recently did the same. Artists have been selling artwork and tickets to concerts as NFTs. There is controversy with NFTs, as with anything involving cryptocurrency or other blockchain use. It uses a lot of energy in verifying the transactions and in crypto mining, though I don't know enough to explain why. As such, it's considered wasteful and environmentally damaging. Electricity has to be produced, and there is a cost to that in natural resources and emissions. It's possible to make blockchain more energy efficient, and it's being worked on, though I can't say to what degree. Right now, crypto and NFTs are a novelty. In the future, they could be a common tool of commerce, and if so, that efficiency could be vitally important. If you want to learn more about NFTs, there's an article in the links, or you can just Google it. There's a lot of information out there. And if you want to learn more about crypto, there's a great episode on it in Yang Speaks, also in the links. And speaking of Yang, he quoted some shocking figures recently. Apparently, New York City spent $450,000 on each inmate, up from $334,000 in 2019. That is a lot of money to spend on incarceration. I could live most of the rest of my life comfortably for what the city spends on each prisoner in a single year. That is insane. It could also cover a $1,000 UBI for 37 people. It really highlights how much is saved by preventing crime rather than treating it. A quick Google search tells me that almost 1% of the American population is currently incarcerated, which is also insane. UBI has been shown to reduce crime up to 40%. That was just a short-term trial. I would bet a long-term UBI would go even further, but that's also the high watermark among the trials, so let's go with 30% crime reduction. That means about 11% of UBI's cost in New York City could be covered by reduction in incarceration alone. That's not counting healthcare savings, shelter savings, welfare savings, GDP growth, or even other costs of crime treatment, just incarceration. But we can't afford UBI and other social stabilizers? Right. Mayor Schaaf announced Tuesday that Oakland will be implementing a basic income trial. It's needed. Nearly 17% of Oakland's population lives in poverty. The plan is for 600 residents to receive $500 a month for 1.5 years. This makes it 5 times the size of the Stockton pilot. Oakland has chosen to target people of color in the trial, and those under 50% of local median income, with half of the spots reserved for those in federal poverty. It will be privately funded via donations from Blue Meridian Partners. I never like to see conditions on these trials, and bringing race into it is going to make it much more controversial and divisive. I certainly understand that people are disadvantaged by systemic racism and why it would make sense to help them first, but I also feel this could fuel both racism and class division with its eligibility requirements, rather than uniting people as a UBI would. We'll have to hope that all the different groups being targeted in different trials create a collage that demonstrates how it can help everyone, rather than turning local sentiment against it. It's still cash that comes with no strings attached, so it's a step up from traditional welfare. I think the idea is that these build up support for tax-funded actual UBIs. I'm just not entirely sure that they will, if they create resentment among those excluded in the trials. I don't really know where to come down on it, honestly. But there's movement on the national stage as well. Congresswoman Bonnie Coleman has introduced the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program Act. This bill directs the Department of Health and Human Services to implement a 3-year pilot to provide a guaranteed monthly income to 6,000 American taxpayers between the ages of 18 and 65, with another 6,000 serving as a control group. This would make it the largest pilot in the U.S. by a wide margin. The payout would be equal to the fair market rent of a 2-bedroom home in their zip code. The eligibility criteria are yet to be determined, as are the parameters to be tracked in the study. While there are many important unknowns, and while I would prefer that we dispense with the endless piloting and just implement a small UBI instead, this is another big sign of UBI's growing popularity in DC and should be supported. But the best of all is on display in South Korea, where we have new details on their rural basic income. It will be implemented by the second half of this year, will encompass 3,000 to 7,000 rural Gyeonggi residents, provide the equivalent of between $89 and $443 per month in local currency, and with a spending deadline to encourage local spending, and will last at least 2 years regardless of the recipient's income, assets, or employment status. Data on psychological well-being, the economy, employment, and inequality will be collected and compared to the control group. That is the kind of UBI trial I want to see here and everywhere. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the Texas voter fraud thread, the New York City incarceration cost, the Oakland trial, the national trial, and the Korean trial. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the Resist bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way, and don't forget to Yang Daily.